One of the first theories to be developed to consider why prejudice occurs, and which became fairly popular, was Theodor Adorno's work regarding authoritarian personality. Adorno thought that if someone was prejudiced against one group, then they would be more likely to be prejudiced against other groups. His ideas were based on the concept of ethnocentrism, which means that someone believes they belong to a superior group and that other groups are inferior to them. Adorno looked at anti-Semitism, meaning prejudice against Jewish people. He wanted to try to find out whether, if someone was prejudiced against Jewish people, then would they be more likely to be prejudiced against other groups. He developed what's known as the F scale, which stood for fascism scale. When he referred to authoritarian attitudes, he was referring to the idea that some people think there should be absolute obedience to authority and that one should oppress their subordinates. While Adorno's research was quite popular immediately after World War II, when he was actually testing his hypotheses, social scientists today would not agree with his basic premise that authoritarian personalities are the basis for prejudice. Instead, current theorists have focused on the idea that social learning perpetuates cultural messages. Individuals receive messages from society about ethnicity, race, and other social characteristics from interactions within their own racial, ethnic groups and with individuals from other races and ethnicities. Simply put, prejudice arises from prejudiced environments. And symbolic interaction theory, which believes that people interpret symbols and human interactions to create social life, symbolic interaction theory would look at the way in which messages of prejudice are communicated to individuals within the community. Agents of socialization help children learn about society and learn the values and expectations of the social world, and each culture has its own messages, belief systems, values, and expectations that children are taught. Children in some communities have little exposure to those that are unlike them, and children tend to model their parents' behaviors, their words, their phrases, their nonverbal communications, things like gestures or facial expressions. So children model their parents, then later in life their peers, and they keep modeling those attitudes and expressions. Without even realizing it, children internalize the messages, the values, and the beliefs of the people around them. And sometimes the media also has a big role, particularly when children start to drift away from their families as they go through adolescence. Sociologists would say that individuals internalize messages. When I say internalize, I'm referring to the idea that people incorporate the values, the patterns of culture, etc. within the self, and that becomes part of their conscious or their subconscious, and they become guiding principles through their learning or socialization. We also know that people that have high socioeconomic status tend to underreport prejudiced beliefs. We know that lower socioeconomic status individuals also tend to be more forthright about their prejudicial views of outgroups. We know that education affects prejudice as far as exhibiting outwardly prejudicial beliefs and the reporting of those beliefs. Some researchers state that well-educated whites only underreport due to political correctness, and that there exists at least some evidence that they may still harbor prejudiced thought patterns. There also seems to be a correlation with economic insecurity and higher levels of prejudice. The beliefs regarding that are based on the idea that insecure groups believe they have to compete with other marginalized groups. When a person perceives a threat from another group, then they are more likely to have a more prejudicial mindset towards those that they are threatened by. So if prejudice is a real thing, can we actually measure it? Emery Bogartis started working on this in 1925 and repeated the research through the 1960s. He developed what he called the social distance scale. It tests for prejudice by measuring the willingness of individuals to be participants in activities involving social contact with members of diverse groups. This scale focuses on relationships among individuals and groups and on the usage of stereotypes. It features 60 statements distributed among 7 types of social distance, things like marriage, neighbors, regular friends, co-workers, acquaintances, those outside one's neighborhood, and those outside the country. It uses statements like, I would like to marry, fill in the blank, or I would work beside in an office with, fill in the blank. Remember, the Bogardus social distance scale was developed first in the 1920s, so some of these questions might be a little surprising to you today.